Alors, est-ce que Diablo va réussir là où les autres ont échoué? Très bon titre de vidéo.
And talk about something that I think Diablo 4 is going to amazingly succeed at, and that is...
Alors lui, il a l'air à fond dedans. Là, je vous ai mis un coup de déprime avec le compteur. Oh merde. Je vous ai mis un coup de déprime. Revenez. C'était pour juste, voilà. Ne vous en allez pas.
as we enter into the end game. Now, I think that this is going to really be amazing for both Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 players. For the Diablo 2 players, the world tiers make it, I think, much more balanced and not the arcade style that you might have seen from Diablo 3. But then if you are a Diablo 3 player, the Nightmare Dungeon system is going to be inspired sort of by the Greater system, albeit much more interesting in my opinion. Let's get into it. So I think the first thing to start with when we're talking about what we're going to be doing in Diablo 4 post-leveling is the world tier system. I've seen a lot of people talk about Nightmare Dungeons, and we're going to talk about that here, as well as some of the open world stuff that is going to be in the end game. But honestly, none of that matters nearly as much, in my opinion, to the world tier system, because the implications of how difficult things are going to be and get are really heavily, I guess you could say, implied in how the game actually scales. Now, right here, we have the World Tier 1 and World Tier 2. Now, when you go ahead and look at the sort of scaling here, World Tier 1 is obviously the base difficulty, but World Tier 2 is going to give you a little bit more challenging enemies and a little bit more experience and gold. We all have experienced in the...
Alors, ouais, Jon Snow. Alors, donc là, il parle des World Tier. Effectivement, dans la description... voilà. World Tier 2, ça doit être plus de challenge. Il n'y en a pas eu de ouf, hein, des challenges. Il n'y en a pas eu de ouf. Hein. Donc, j'ai même jamais joué en World Tier 1. Ça doit être la rigolade, quoi.
Beta, World Tier 2, that is what I played on the entire time. But as we scale up, there's actually World Tier 3 and World Tier 4 that unlocks at level 50 and above. You're going to have to do specific dungeons in specific towns to unlock these modes, and you're going to actually end up with new items as well as nightmare sigils, hell tines, and champion monsters. And of course, if we...
Juste quand on regarde hein, le jump du World Tier 2 au World Tier 3, ça va être une dinguerie, hein, tout ce qu'il va avoir en plus. Hein. Ça va être une dinguerie. Juste les Nightmare Sigils, donc les Nightmare Donjons, Helltide, les champions et les objets sacrés et uniques. Ça fait énormément. C'est deux choses qui apparaissent en World Tier 3. Le jump du 1 au 2, c'est rien du tout. Du 2 au 3, c'est une montagne en fait.
Look at the actual details of what we're going to get in terms of advantages, well, we're going to get 100% more experience, additional gold, and they're actually going to overcome some resistances that we have. Now, sacred and unique items have set stats that cannot have legendary affixes transplanted onto them. And then sacred items seem to be, again, sort of like ancients, I guess is a better way to put it, with higher stat rolls. Then we have Tier 4, and now we have ancestral items, and again it's kind of that same idea with like primals as far as I've seen in Diablo 3, and then new unique items, again same thing with the base stats. This one's for level 70, and you can see here this is the highest world tier difficulty, and you can see monsters give 200% increased experience, 15% more gold, and overcome 40% resistance. Now it's important to note here, I actually want to compare this to Diablo 3's Reussir scaling, because I think this is going to give a good idea on where kind of the difficulty and are we going to get...
Alors le gap de difficulté, je ne sais pas. En tout cas, en termes, attends, si on revient un petit peu en arrière, en termes d'XP, il y a un gros up. XP, on a 100% d'XP, on passe de 20% d'XP à 100% d'XP. Ça veut dire que même si tu mets 5 fois plus de temps à tuer un monstre World Tier 3, c'est intéressant. C'est plus intéressant. C'est-à-dire que si en World Tier 2, tu tues un mob, un élite, en 10 secondes, et que tu le tues en 40 secondes en World Tier 3, c'est plus intéressant de faire du World Tier 3. Attends. C'est combien le World Tier 2? 20? 20%, ça fait 120. Ah non, ça fait 120. Non. Ah non, j'ai une connerie. Ouais, c'est ça. Donc faut que tu le tues 2 fois plus vite. Pas 5 fois. Hein. Tu le tues 2 fois plus vite. Un peu moins de 2 fois plus vite. Un peu plus de 2 fois plus vite. Pardon. Ouais, je me suis trompé. Donc ouais, c'est... Faut pas mettre trop de temps non plus à tuer. En fait, dans ce genre de jeu, en vrai, la bonne difficulté, c'est là où tu enchaînes bien. Si tu mets un coup, il meurt, passe à la difficulté, tu vois. Mais suivante. Mais il faut que tu puisses enchaîner correctement les mobs. Donc ouais, ça fait 100, 120, 100 et 200. Ton avis sur le scaling des mobs, tu trouves ça bien? Le scaling des mobs, moi je trouve ça super bien. T'inquiète, moi je suis le barbe qui tourbillonne le plus loin. Bah, les pingouins, on s'en fout. Ouais, non mais je me suis trompé. Sur le... Je me suis emballé sur les trucs. Tout ça pour dire, ouais, le scaling, moi je trouve ça super bien parce que en fin de game, quand tu seras level 100, toute la map sera level 100. Tu n'auras pas des zones que tu vas pas, qui ne seront pas intéressantes, potentiellement intéressantes. Elles seront potentiellement toutes intéressantes. Ça, c'est sûr. Donc ouais. Donc là, l'intérêt, enfin le gain de boost d'XP, il est pas négligeable. Et après, il faut voir si les mobs ils sont intéressants à tuer ou pas. S'ils sont beaucoup trop durs, ça devient. Faut rester en tier 2. Il y a des résistances plus. Ouais, je pense qu'il va y avoir. Bah, je pense que le debuff de 20% sur les résistances, tu le sens hein, quand même. Surtout quand tu es en phase d'XP, t'as pas de résistance. Potentiellement, tu passerais dans le négatif. Et les champions, ouais. Les champions, peut-être que les champions auront une ligne supplémentaire ou un bonus supplémentaire qui sera élémentaire, par exemple. Et qui fait que. Alors, les insensibles, en tier 3, je pense pas, mais en tier 4. Insensible, c'est hard. Hein. Insensible, quand tu as une spé full dans un élément, ou full physique, c'est hard. Les ennemis sont plus formidables. Ça. T'as vu ça où, Pava? Ah ouais, ennemi default. Je sais pas. Ils sont plus formidables. Ça veut peut-être dire qu'ils ont une ligne supplémentaire de... Hein, c'est les ennemis en général. Je sais pas. Peut-être qu'ils ont une compétence de plus, hein, les ennemis. Ouais, j'avoue. Stromae qui vient faire un duo avec les books. Putain, mon rêve. Je sais pas. Je sais pas combien ils peuvent avoir d'axe fixe au maximum. Je dirais 20. C'est le nombre d'affixes maximum. Non, je déconne. Je sais pas. 3, 4, 5, 6, ça peut aller vite. Hein.
Nightmare sigils, hell tines, and champion monsters. And of course, if we look at the actual details of what we're going to get in terms of advantages, well, we're going to get 100% more experience, additional gold, and they're actually going to overcome some resistances that we have. Now, sacred and unique items have
à mon avis,
stats.
Ils savaient pas non plus ce que ça voulait dire. Hein. Ils sont plus formidables.
That cannot have legendary affixes transplanted onto them. And then sacred items seem to be, again, sort of like ancients, I guess is a better way to put it, with higher stat rolls. Then we have tier 4, and now we have...
Et là, on a Emir Armor Fearsome.
Ancestral items, and again, it's kind of that same idea with like primals as far as I've seen in Diablo 3, and then new unique items, again, same thing with the base stats. This one's for level 70, and you can see here, this is the highest world tier difficulty, and you can see monsters give 200% increased experience, 15% more gold, and overcome 40% resistance. Now, it's important to note here, I actually want to compare this to Diablo 3's Greater Rift scaling, because I think this is going to give a good idea on where kind of the difficulty, and are we going to get this like massive arcade style where we're zipping across everywhere, one-shotting everything? I don't think so. So pulling up Maxwell's site and looking at the D3 Greater Rift HP scaling, basically it scales, well, quite a bit, almost about 20% per tier that you're going up. I should say 17%
là,
from the previous tier.
On peut pas savoir. Là, il va partir sur des suppositions de ouf. On peut pas savoir. 15% gold
is what you're going to be scaling. So this is a massive, massive HP boost. And this goes up to 150. And as you start to get to like plus 50 tiers, let's say you're starting out level 1, Great Rift 1, and then you go to 51, well, you're getting 2,200% increased HP. Based on what we've seen in the Diablo 4 world tiers, this will not be the case. So we're not going to be doing trillions, billions of damage, it seems like, because arguably the world tiers are not going to scale nearly as hard. And I think of the world tiers sort of like the T16. For those of you that don't know, T16 is kind of like the open world in Diablo 3, the maximum difficulty where you're running bounties, etc. Now, that's going to be roughly about 1,000% increased HP. And based on what we've seen,
là, concrètement, on peut pas savoir. Là, il est en train de parler de Diablo 3 où les pourcentages, ils sont de ouf. On sait que ça va pas être le cas sur Diablo 4, mais on peut pas savoir combien ça va être. De toute façon, moi, je stuff Magic Find. Eh ben, bah, tu vas être tout nu, c'est ça que tu veux dire. Je pense pas qu'il y ait du Magic Find comme stat. J'en ai pas vu. Donc, tu vas te mettre en tout nu avec un bâton et un slip. Arcou, le mage, le sorcier blanc.
Much about the other difficulties, but there is no increase in terms of HP from the base difficulty to World Tier 2, and so I would surmise, based on what we're seeing in terms of scaling, well, we're not going to really have a whole lot of trillions and billions of damage, and so these world tiers seemingly give us a glimpse into kind of how our builds are going to shape up, and arguably for the better, because I think a lot of people, especially from D2, dislike the fact that in D3, all you do is load up a bunch of movement speed and try to one-shot your way through everything. And I think this is much more akin to something that they would enjoy. Now, here's where I think Diablo 4's endgame starts to become something that no other game really has done a great job. And the first thing is going to be the Whispers of the Dead, or the Tree of Whispers. Basically, around the world, there's going to be these whispers displayed on your map, and you're going to go to them, get rewarded with experience, gold, and grim favors. Supposedly, these are going to be like the open world events that we experienced in beta, albeit kind of supercharged. And then you can exchange these grim favors for essentially loot and experience, which we saw in the end game beta footage. This is basically encouraging people to run around and do open world events. We will see if these loot and experience boxes essentially are going to be comparable to Nightmare Dungeons. As far as we've seen, it looks like it's going to be worth doing. And as long as this is worth doing, I think this makes it a lot more interesting in terms of kind of sort of akin to the MMO style, which I know that a lot of people may not enjoy that, but I do think it lends itself to a much more interesting sort of end game rather than just running the same Greater Rift or same Mephisto runs over and over and over again. Then of course,
il a parlé de l'arbre des murmures en disant que c'était il pensait que c'était un truc révolutionnaire, hein, puisque sur le titre de sa vidéo, c'est est-ce que Diablo va réussir là où les autres ont foiré. Il nous parle de l'arbre des murmures qui est principalement des bounties une bounty à faire à droite à gauche. Moi, je pense pas que dans le gameplay, ça soit révolutionnaire. Par contre, dans les récompenses, ça peut être intéressant. Mais voilà, c'est simplement, il y a des parties de la map qui vont être taguées. rouge, tu vas dans le truc rouge et tu fais ce qu'il y a à faire. Tu clean tout et t'es récompensé. C'est une manière de pousser le joueur à se trimballer sur la map, comme il disait. Je ne sais pas s'il va y avoir d'événements intéressants avec ça, quoi. Donc, en vrai, je sais pas. Peut-être s'ils nous mettent des trucs, comme on a vu tout à l'heure dans la vidéo, en open world, des événements qui viennent un petit peu voilà, nous faire un petit peu des aventures, comme des embuscades, des combats, tu dois participer à des combats que tu n'avais pas prévus, etc. Ça peut être cool. Mais là, comme ça m'a l'air ok, sans être révolutionnaire, quoi. Donc, est-ce qu'ils vont réussir là où les autres ont foiré?
Of course, we have the Nightmare Dungeons. These Nightmare Dungeons are basically regular dungeons with an added challenge. Some of the challenges could be something like double bosses. All enemies are invisible until you actually get into combat with them. Or like what we saw in that endgame footage where you have the blood portals where you have to close them by killing all the monsters. These Nightmare Sigils can definitely up the difficulty levels and supposedly can go up infinitely, which also determines sort of your rarity of your item drops, so potentially it's an additional ancestral or sacreds. Now, also the dungeon affixes that I mentioned earlier are based on these Nightmare Sigils as well, so these will customize them even further depending on how many you use them. Now, on top of that, we already know what we're getting into when we're entering these dungeons.
Les donjons du cauchemar, c'est les maps.
Around these things with the proper, I guess you could say, team comp or build based on the Nightmare Sigils that we are using. Now, I find this to be a lot more interesting than just running the same thing with a similar map layout and the exact same mechanics, meaning like, let's say I'm going to do D2, right? What's the same thing over and over and over again? There really isn't a whole big difference, but you know, maybe
c'est notre expérience. Effectivement, ça te pousse à changer de contenu et pas farmer le même contenu H24 tout le temps.
A lot less interesting than actually changing some of the affixes again, potentially like double bosses. So now you kind of want to go in with a boss killing build so that you can actually do that. Or potentially like the blood portals, right? So now you have to go in and maybe you want to run with a lot more AoE because you have to clear a lot more trash. Who knows how many other sigils are there? But I think these end up making it so that some of the more build variety is going to be necessary based on the sigils, and you're going to be min-maxing certain parts of your build.
En gros, là, il va terminer la vidéo là-dessus, j'ai l'impression. Ouais, putain, ça fait chier. En gros, il dit, ouais, ça pourrait être une dinguerie, mais on sait pas. On sait pas. On sait pas qu'est-ce que ça va débloquer réellement, comment on va ressentir le jeu. Voilà, quoi. On va voir ce qu'il va dire, mais là, c'est des suppositions plus que chose.
To a much more interesting playstyle, because oftentimes when you're running in D3, for example, if I run, I don't know, let's say a Tal Rasha wizard build, I make a couple modifications if I want to speed farm for Paragon level or just to solo push. But as soon as I do that solo push, I run the exact same build over and over and over again. In fact, I cannot change it really at all in the combat. So it really doesn't, I guess you say, mix up your gameplay at all. And I think this will. And I think that's what makes itself such an interesting sort of end game concept. Now, of course, if you're a casual player, you may not even be doing any of this. You may just run in, do your dungeon, same build over and over and over again. But I think that arguably, if you're going to talk about your casual players, then the end game doesn't really matter a whole lot because people are just enjoying the game. That's kind of what a casual player does. I think the end game tends to be more appealing to your hardcore / more dedicated audience. And so when you consider talking about the end game, I generally have that audience in mind. Now, I do think that despite this, I think a lot of people are going to be casual players, the vast majority, in every game. And I think that still, this is going to be an extremely fun thing to do, even if you're not min-maxing it, just to constantly grind up sort of your levels in these Nightmare Sigils and Nightmare Dungeons. I'm pretty excited about this, and I think that this is going to be a lot more interesting than Diablo 2 and Diablo 3's current end game. Speaking as someone who is a definitely hardcore player, who plays a lot more than your average person, so this is pretty exciting to me, and I wanted to share it with you all. And I think that it's going to be a
OK, c'est un
lot
joueur
better
hardcore
and a
et
lot more
il
fun
pense que le challenge
than
il vient
Diablo
que
3 and
du
Diablo
hardcore.
2.
Après,
Because
faut
me
voir, hein,
personally,
si,
I know some
si en
people
mode
disagree,
normal,
and they can run the same Mephisto run or
décide de rouler
run
sur le
raid
jeu,
rips over and over
forcément.
and over again and not be bored at all. To me, I like the novelty of new seasons, and I enjoy those games, although I haven't really played too much Diablo 2. I really enjoy Diablo 3 for a short period of time before it kind of grows and gets stale based on the season. And hopefully with Diablo 4's Nightmare Dungeon, I still think that will happen, because I do not disagree with anyone saying that these are repetitive. I still think they're going to be repetitive, but
Ben
I
oui,
think
c'est
that'll
un
be
hack and slash, ça
a
doit
little
être
bit more
répétitif.
variety when we get to that end game. And hopefully, again, with that season kind of mechanic in Diablo 4, it'll do that same thing that Diablo 3 does for me. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. Are you interested in this system more so than Diablo 2, Diablo 3? What are you excited about most? And I'll see you all for the next video.
OK, ouais, et beaucoup de blabla pour pas dire grand-chose, sur sa fin de vidéo. Bon, c'est en gros, il sait pas, il fait beaucoup de suppositions. Les mécaniques qu'il a annoncées, quoi, qu'on connaît, bah, pour lui, c'est OK et il voit beaucoup de profondeur dans le jeu. À voir si, bah, Diablo va lui donner raison ou pas. En tout cas, oui, je pense que il y a pour une sortie, on va dire normale, il y a déjà pas mal de contenu, qui va débarquer. Voir ce qu'ils vont nous apporter en plus, le 20 avril. Je pense qu'il va y avoir quand même quelques petites surprises d'annoncer, le 20 avril. Je l'espère en tout cas.